If you could find out what day you were going to die, would you? How many of you guys, if you could find out what day you're going to die, would? Put up your hand. I'd love to know. Okay, how many of you guys would not? Okay, how many of you guys didn't raise your hand at all? Yeah, a few. Okay. I did find out. I actually, when you want to know a fact, you do what you should do. You go on the internet, you just type in your question, and it'll give you the truth, right? That's the way it works. So I went online to find out what day I was going to die, and there's a website that kind of tells you all this stuff. So I found that really helpful, and so I went in and I entered my age and my weight and conditions that I have and all these other things, and it spits out this algorithm and lets me know, and this is what it told me. October 11th, 2056, which I thought I would last longer than that. To be honest, I was born in 1982. I guess I'm going to die in 2056. I didn't like the number, and so a little bit later I went back and I just want to try this again, put in the same information, and then it spit out October 15th, 2076. So there's a bit of a range there. Maybe the internet isn't as reliable as I thought it was. I could live to be that long, or I could live much shorter. On one side of my family, I got some good stock. My great-grandma lived to be 112. She was actually the oldest person in Canada at one point before she died. But also on the other side of that family, my dad's cousin lived to be my age exactly and died of a heart attack. So I don't know which side I'll end up on. But it's an interesting thing to think about. I didn't think, you probably are like, I didn't know we were talking about this morning. Stick with me. It's an interesting thing to think about because we are not in control of the first number or the last number. On your tombstone, you will have two numbers. One of them you already know, the second one you don't know, but both of those numbers you had no control whatsoever on. They happen to you. But on your tombstone, you'll have a dash in the middle of those two numbers. And that dash in the middle is the only thing that you can control. And when you think about that dash, there's even a lot of things in that dash that you don't have control over. We talked about this last week if you were with us. You don't control a lot of things, but you get to control your posture, the decisions that you make, how you're going to live within that dash. And I believe when it comes to that dash and the life that you live and how you live that life, the determining factor is what you believe to be true, not just about life, but about eternity in general. How we think about eternity, how we think about how we got here, if there's anything beyond this life, has huge implications for how you live in that dash. The posture that you take, the decisions that you're going to make, the type of life that you're going to leave. And when people look at your tombstone and they think about your life and your legacy and all of those things, how they talk about you will be determined by how you live during that dash. And how you live during that dash is going to be determined by what you believe to be true, particularly what you believe to be true about life and eternity. Now, historically, there's been a couple of different views about how we should view life. In an oversimplistic explanation, there's typically been a Western view and an Eastern view. And in the Western mindset, life is one life. You get one life, and it's linear. There's a beginning, and there's an end to this life. In the Eastern mindset, they believe in cyclical life or infinite life. And you have you got this life, but then you'll have another life. And we are infinite beings. And what we believe about one of these two sets of paradigms, of mindsets, is going to determine how we live. In the Eastern mindset, maybe particularly seen in Hinduism, who believe in the reincarnation, they live in life in a way that's not really much in a hurry. And they don't live in a hurry because they think that the life that they have is the lot that they have because of the previous life that they had. And then their future life, they'll get another chance to live better if that opportunity comes up. And so they believe in the cyclical idea of eternity in life. In the Western mindset, The Greeks in particular believed that each person had one life, and because of this, they had a greater sense of urgency in the life that they were living. Much of the philosophy in the Western world came out of that Greek culture, and many of those philosophers ended up being atheists. And what's interesting to happen is that type of urgency turns into anxiety when you take out eternity. Because there's a sense of urgency needing to do something with this one life that has a finite beginning and ending, and yet that's all it is. And so it ends up in despair, nihilism, and anxiety. And right in the middle of those two worldviews, you have a Hebrew understanding of life, which is the context in which our scriptures were written. At the intersection of Western and Eastern worldview, you have the Hebrews who were both compelled by the one and the infinite, that we each have one life, but this life is significant because it's part of an infinite story. If urgency of one life is what compels us to our most heroic lives, like the Western worldview, the Hebrews understood that. But if the infinite view helps us to live with a sense of connectedness and peace and context in which our life lands and how we live out that dash, they had that as well. So you don't know what the numbers are going to be in your gravestone, the first number, the last number, but you are in control of the dash in the middle of those two numbers. And I believe that Hebrew worldview and mindset has something to offer us when we consider how we're going to live. Now, when we think about that second number, it is a little weighty. I mean, as soon as I got into it, I could feel the life in this room just go, this is heavy. And it is going to be a little bit heavy this morning. I'm just going to give you a heads up. But it's important. Another way of thinking about this question is if the writing is on the wall and you have an expiration date, how then will you live? How then will you live? And so that's what we're talking about this morning. And so as I said, it's going to feel a little heavy, and I'm going to give you some truth, and you're going to feel the weight of that truth a little bit. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you why the truth I just gave you isn't really the whole truth. Okay? So the writing on the wall. This phrase is actually a biblical phrase. We use it in culture. You might have heard this phrase before, and if you look up in the dictionary what this phrase is all about, it says there are clear signs that something or unpleasant or unwelcome is about to happen. That's where the phrase comes from. And so this phrase comes out of Daniel chapter 5. It's clearly and solely from the Bible in Daniel chapter 5, but it becomes a bit of a cultural phrase that gets used talking about impending doom, something that you know is going to happen and you can't stop it. And so that comes from Daniel chapter 5. And so we're going to dive into the text this morning as we're continue on in our series, Life in Babylon. And so we pick it up at the beginning of the chapter. It says, King Belshazzar, which we'll stop right there. If you were with us the last 6 weeks, we've been talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. And so we ended chapter 4 last week, and it ends with Nebuchadnezzar, and all of a sudden, right away, we got a change in the story, a change in the king. We have no context, and it just jumps right into King Belshazzar. So King Belshazzar, not to be confused with Belteshazzar, if you remember, which is Daniel's Babylonian name. So Daniel good, Belshazzar bad. Belteshazzar good, Belshazzar bad. And so if you're looking to name your child, you're looking for a name, Belteshazzar is on the table. Use that one. Belshazzar, not as much, okay? So you got King Belshazzar, who is 3 kings later than King Nebuchadnezzar. And so we don't just have like a next day, even though it's the next chapter, the next verse. This is not the next day situation. This is down the road. We are in the beginning of the story that we started, Daniel was 15 years old. By the time King Belshazzar comes to rule, Daniel is in his 80s. Okay, this is 66 years later. Daniel has outlasted multiple kings. And there's been lots of prophecies and things that we've talked about where God's kingdom is so much bigger than the kingdoms of this world. And so kings came and kings went, and kings came and kings went. And we're a few now down the line. We got Belshazzar, and now The kingdom of Babylon, which is in power, is about to end. This is why this chapter is important, because this is the time when Babylon falls. And then the Medes and the Persians actually take over. And so Daniel is over 80 by this point. And it says, King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold, the silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. And so if you remember, King Nebuchadnezzar was going around, he was capturing other nations, taking exiles into his land, and he would steal idols from those nations, the gods that they worshiped, as a way of showing that the Babylonian gods and himself conquered those nations and were more powerful than their gods. When they went to the temple in Jerusalem, there was no idols in the temple of Jerusalem, because the Torah, the Israelites God commanded them in the Torah not to make any idols. And so there's no idols in the temple. So they took what they had, which were these golden goblets, and King Nebuchadnezzar stole those, brought them to his temple as a way of saying he had conquered the God of the Israelites. And so all these years later, we have Belshazzar, and he takes from the temple these goblets that Nebuchadnezzar had taken out. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of the God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold, silver, iron, wood, and stone. They're really mocking the God of Israel by doing this. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. So this is where the phrase, the writing on the wall, is coming from. So this hand shows up like some sci-fi movie. You see this floating hand, and it starts writing on the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. In fact, if you go into the original language of that phrase, they're translating it in a more appropriate way. The literal translation is Belshazzar pooped his pants. That's actually what it says. He lost control of his functions, and so he's freaking out. He's freaking out. And so after this point, he can read what was written. So the hand's writing these things, and he's trying to make it out. He doesn't understand the language. It wasn't a known language. And so we've seen this type of thing a few times already with King Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't have an answer. He calls in his experts. And so his experts come in, these interpreters come in, and they look at the writing on the wall and see what's happening. And none of them can interpret what is happening. So then the king's wife says, well, I remember there was a guy who worked with King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was really gifted at interpreting dreams. His name is Daniel. Let's bring Daniel in and see if Daniel can read these, what is written on the wall. So Daniel was brought in before the king. And so before we continue, remember that when people follow the Babylonian mindset, which is a me-first mindset, my power, my will, my comfort, my security, everything else is secondary to me. The result of that type of posture is confusion and chaos. And societies will always find themselves, when they take God out of the center, in a place of confusion and chaos, and they'll be asking questions in which they don't have an answer for. And so Daniel, again, shows up as God's chosen person at this time for this reason, where he can bring wisdom and clarity because God's Spirit has enabled him to do that to a culture and a society that is asking a question they don't have an answer for. So when culture doesn't know how to answer the questions, will we be ready to speak insight, intelligence, and wisdom into culture like Daniel does? And so Daniel was brought in, and the king said to him, are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the Spirit of the gods is in you and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, The Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and people of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride. So remember, if you joined us last week, here's a little bit of a recap of the story we looked at last week. The truth is you can get humbled or you can get humble. One of those two realities will befall all of us. You can get humbled or you can get humble. When his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was humbled. He was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people, which is what our pride does, and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. So if you weren't here last week, you can go online and we talk about this story and the significance of that story last week. Continuing, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself. You knew all this. You're aware of the story. I was thinking about this past week when we talked about Remembrance Day. And Remembrance Day, why is it significant? Not just because we remember something that happened in the past, but the reason we have a Remembrance Day is so that we will not make the same mistakes that happened in our history. Like we remember for a reason. We remember for a purpose. It's not just to have this knowledge. It's so that hopefully the past informs how we live in the present. And so Daniel's saying, you knew this. You were aware of the story that happened with King Nebuchadnezzar, and you didn't pay attention to what happened in history, and now you're going to repeat the same mistakes. You've not humbled yourself, although you knew this. Instead, you have set up for yourself against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Written not in a language that was known to them. So Daniel gives him the interpretation. He says, this is what the words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, or Parsin, Perez the singular form. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple and gold chain, was placed around his neck. Wait a second, I thought he said he didn't want the gifts, but he took them anyways. All right, fine, I'll take them. And was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Babylon, the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So 3 words, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene, God has numbered your days. Tekel, your life is weighed and it was found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom will be divided. In other words, this is going to cost you more than you anticipated. Mene, your days are numbered like sand through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives. We got any days of our lives fans here? Come on, this is a safe place. Confess. Yeah, we got an honest lady up here in front. That's great. Little quick story. When I was in junior high, I was 14 or 13 or something. I was staying at my grandparents' place in summer, and they had a camper trailer, and I got to stay in the camper trailer, not in the house. I got to stay out in the camper trailer, and it was kind of like my place to hang out for a couple of weeks that summer. And there was a TV in the camper trailer, and that TV had rabbit ears on it. You guys know what rabbit ears are? Before cable, you were kind of at the whim of whatever the rabbit ears could pick up. And so there was like only 2 channels that this TV was able to play. And the only thing on in the afternoons was soap operas. And so as like a 13-year-old kid, I got hooked on Days of Our Lives. I was like, this is amazing. Is that show still on? Okay, there's a lot of yeses out here, but only one of you guys said you watched it. You're busted. Trick question. So that's the start of the show, right? You got the hourglass. Stand through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. Mene. Our lives are numbered. The Bible tells us that we must take stock and think about our brevity in life, our dash in this life. In fact, the psalmist says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. How do you number your days when you don't know how many days you have? How do you even go about doing that? The psalmist would also say in Psalm 39, Lord, remind me how brief my time on earth will be. Remind me that my days are numbered, how fleeting my life is. You have made my life no longer than the width of my hand. My entire lifetime is just a moment to you. At best, each of us is but a breath. And so the psalmist in a number of places recognizes that life is brief. It's but a breath. It's just a wind that comes and goes. And it encourages us to think about the brevity of life. But this isn't an invitation to live with gloom and anxiety. It's actually an invitation to take a proper, eternal perspective, an infinite perspective with the one life that you have. It's an invitation to think about your life with some purpose and meaning. To remember that the sand in the hourglass is meant to be seen in the context of an eternal story that you get to be a part of. The one and the infinite together. And often when we think about time, we think about time in 3 tenses, past, present, and future. And some of us like to live in one of those tenses more than the other tenses. Some of us live in the past. You get together with your friends and it's all nostalgia. Like, I remember when we won that sports game 20 years ago. It was amazing. You get together with your friends, like, you just live in the past, nostalgia. Or you live in the past in regret. You're still beating yourself up over things that happened years ago or things that were happened to you and you can't get past it. And so you're actually living in the past. Some of us are constantly trying to live in the future. So we're busy. We're in the rat race. We're thinking, one day I'm going to get to this place and then I'll be content. Then I'll have peace. Then I'll finally have arrived. And so we're always living, chasing that one day in the future, and we get full of busyness. Our lives get full of busyness, and we join the rat race, and we're chasing after whatever that one day is. And once we get there, we realize there's another one day, and there's another one day, and we're always living in the future, and we're never actually totally present. Or we're always worried about the future, and we're living in the present with anxiety. And so depending on who you are, we probably get stuck either in the past or the future. You're trying to live out of one of those 2 tenses, and it robs us from being present. And so how do you become present in the moment, in the dash, in the life that God has given you? The obvious answer is, well, you just try and focus on the present, but that's not true. Some of you have tried that. You're like, I'm just going to focus on the present. I'm just going to focus on the now. And you're looking down. And you're just reacting to life. That doesn't actually help you be more present. Here's my thought that I'd like to flow with you. How you become more present is not focusing on the present. The problem isn't that we're looking further into the future or that we're looking into the future. The problem is that we're not looking far enough into the future. In fact, the psalmist is saying that how you become present is not just to focus on how brief your life is, but to focus on how brief your life is in the context of eternity, how you've been given one life in the context of an infinite story. Viktor Frankl was a psychologist, philosopher. He wrote a book called Man's Search for meaning. And he was a Jewish psychologist who had this theory, this working theory around how people live with a sense of purpose and meaning. And he was working this out. He had notes he was going to write a book about it. And then he got captured in Nazi Germany and taken to a concentration camp in Auschwitz. It was in Auschwitz that he had to figure out whether what he believed to be true was actually true. And here was his working theory, that how man thinks about the future, thinks about eternity, impacts their ability to live with meaning and purpose in the present. And then he goes into a concentration camp. And when you have no future, when your life is filled with suffering and pain, he had to figure out, is there a way for me to still have a sense of meaning and purpose in the present? And to, I think, his joy and his surprise, he found a way to be content and have peace and have meaning even in the suffering of Auschwitz. Sigmund Freud was a psychologist at the time as well, just before him. And Freud had this theory that it was our conditions that we live in that ultimately form who we are. So basically Freud would say, your environment, your upbringing, your conditions, that's what makes you who you are. Frankl was saying something different. And so Frankl lived through the concentration camps in Auschwitz. He survived, and then he wrote a book, and you can read that book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And he says, basically, thank heaven. He talks about Freud because Freud was influential to him. He says, thank heaven Freud was spared from knowing the concentration camps of Auschwitz. His subjects, those who Freud is helping, lay on couches. Freud is saying, if everybody had the same experience, and Freud uses the idea of if they were all experiencing hunger together. If everybody was put into an extreme condition of hunger, no matter their differences, that suffering, that joint suffering would help them become more the same, and they would become one people because their experience was the same. Frankl says that, thank goodness that he didn't experience the concentration camps, but his view is flawed because I saw the exact opposite. When people got into the concentration camp, their differences didn't become less, their differences became more. He says the individual differences did not blur, but on the contrary, people became more different. People amassed themselves to be both swine and saints. And so what he is saying, the difference between becoming a swine or a saint is the difference between how they viewed eternity, how they viewed purpose, how they viewed what they were living for. And when man lost his purpose, when they lost his sense of being tied to a greater story, they became swine. Listen to what he says. He says, in the concentration camps, we watched and witnessed some of our comrades behave like swine while others behave like saints. Man has both potentialities within himself. After all, man is the being who has invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who has entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer on his lips. He's saying what separates people isn't the conditions they're living in. What separates people is their view of eternity and life and the context that they think about their life. And how they think about that will determine the person they become. You have a limited number of days. How you view those days will determine how you live. Tekel. You've been weighed on the scales and your life is found wanting. I don't know about you, but I like avoiding scales, yeah? I don't like the scales. We don't like to think about weighing in and weighing ourselves in all matter of things, not just our weight, but being measured, our lives being measured. But the truth of the scriptures are that all of our lives will be measured. All of our lives will be weighed. And so what will be weighed? Well, Jesus sums up the Torah, the whole Old Testament law with 2 commandments. He says, you could sum the whole thing up into 2 things, love God and love people. Ultimately, that's what we get weighed on. Did you love God? Did you submit to God? Did you love people? But how do you do that? Well, God's given you resources at your disposal to do that. And we teach about this in Starting Point class, and each of these is a sermon in and of itself. But you basically have three things. You have time, treasure, and talent that God has given you. He's given you those resources to steward, to love him, and to love others. How you use those things in that dash will determine how you're weighed. That's what the Bible tells us. Parsin. Parsin means divided. What it meant to Belshazzar was, this is going to cost you something. You didn't number your days. You're going to be weighed. And the cost of that is going to be expensive. And it was. He lost his life that very night. He'd given away his legacy because he didn't live his life with an eternal perspective. He had forgotten the lessons that King Nebuchadnezzar was taught. And he chose to just live for the now and live for him. And his life was weighed, and it cost him his very life. Mene, Tekel, Parsin. All three words, all three messages, all three warnings are related to one another. We could read it this way. When you don't count your days, you will be out of balance, and it will cost you. There's the message that was on the wall. That was the writing on the wall. When you don't count your days, you'll be out of balance, and it's going to cost you. You may not know what the second number will be on your gravestone, or you can't control the first number or the second number, but you can control how you live in that dash. Count your days. Allow that to change how you live your life and what you value. Because when we don't, it will cost us. And some of you know this because you're living with the cost of that right now. You know people that are living with the cost of that. You haven't taken an eternal perspective. You're stuck in the past or the future, or you're living for you, for me, and it's costing you. The warning that was on the wall, the writing on the wall, was to take stock of your days and to live from an eternal perspective so that you could leave a legacy and live a life of meaning and purpose that honors God. To live your one life in the context of the infinite. So this feels heavy, right? You can feel the heaviness. Let me help you out. So what I told you is true. And I said, I'm going to tell you the truth, and then I'm going to tell you why that thing I told you isn't completely true. So what I told you isn't the complete truth. It is true. It's a theme that you see in the Bible over and over again. This is important stuff. And for some of you, it's important to pause there and to take that in. But let me give you the full truth. As much as you try, you're not going to be able to do it. So what I just gave you was like a good, true message. And what I also gave you was a recipe for frustration and hopelessness. Because if you try and weigh your own life and count your days and live as best as you can, you will still be found wanting. You will. The truth is you'll fail. So welcome to church. So this is important. These three messages are important. But if you just think about these three messages, it will lead you to despair. You will fail. You and I are Belshazzar. There's no way around it. You know, maybe we're not counting the cost tonight. I don't know. Maybe our time's not up yet, but our time's up some point. We're Belshazzar. If what I told you was all I told you, I just gave you nothing but religion. I gave you nothing but an effort to make yourself right with God and to try really hard and to live a really, really good life. And there's value in there in and of itself. But what it will lead to is despair. What it'll lead to is disappointment. What it will lead to is you get to this point in your life where you didn't perfectly count your days, and now it's time to get weighed, and you realize I didn't quite measure up. And here's the truth that the gospel gives us. Romans tells you that we've all fallen short. We've all sinned. We've all lived a life of unbalanced. So 2,000 years ago, Jesus, God with flesh on, shows up in the scene. He came with a purpose. He came knowing that he had a certain amount of days to do something that the Father told him to do. He lived a perfect life, a sinless life, a balanced life, made no mistakes, a pure life, was fully human. And yet, he paid a brutal, tragic cost. Why? Because he knew that you had a certain amount of days, that you would try religiously to live your life really, really well and be a really good person, and you were going to fall short, and that there was going to be a cost for you to be paid. And he said, I want to pay it for you so that you can live in eternity with God, so that you can live in the present with hope and a future. See, there's a difference from living from something and for something. The message Belshazzar gave, if that's all I gave you, you're just left with living for something, trying to live to be good enough. That's not going to get you there. But Jesus does everything that you can't do so that you can live from something. We get his perfection. We get his sinlessness. We get his purity because of what he's done on the cross. The perfect man who suffered for us, raised to life 3 days later, now invites you through your humility to receive forgiveness and grace, because he paid the price and the cost for all of us to be made right with God, so that we can live from a place of security and hope, knowing that our lives can have meaning because of what Jesus has done for us. Come on, can I get an amen? Okay, so Jesus is your ticket to living a life of meaning and purpose, to making that dash make sense. This is what Belshazzar did not understand. And you can live your life as Belshazzar. You can live your life trying. You're going to fail. You can try it, but you're going to fail. Or you can humble yourself, and this is the message of the entire book of Daniel. You humble yourself. Recognize that God is God and that you are not, that Jesus did everything that you couldn't do for yourself, and that he gives you the offer of life and forgiveness so that you can take an eternal perspective and live your one life in the context of the infinite with hope, with meaning. And so the invitation is for you. Have you received the gift that Jesus has for you? Maybe you have in the past, but you've forgotten, and you got on this treadmill of religion, and you're trying to muster up enough energy so that your life is going to matter, it's going to mean something. You got to stop that. The invitation through Daniel, the invitation through the gospel is humble yourself, receive from God, and then your dash will have meaning and significant, not because of how great you are, but because of how great Jesus is, and he's given his spirit to live in you and do something through you. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. I'm gonna make two invitations as we close. The first invitation is, I believe that there's some folks that are here with us this morning that are just trying really, really hard to be a good person. You got to stop trying. There's some folks this morning that are trying really, really hard to be a good person. You want to live a meaningful life, but you don't get there by just trying. You actually have to surrender your life to Jesus. And if you're here this morning and you've never surrendered your life to Jesus, all of our heads are bowed. This is between you and the Lord. This is an opportunity for you to humble yourself before the Lord and say, I want to receive the forgiveness and the life that Jesus has for me. And if that's you this morning, I just want you to raise a hand right now. I'm going to pray for you. Yeah, I see that hand. Amen. Yeah. Is there anybody else? Yeah. Amen. The second invitation is, maybe like Belshazzar, we have short memories. We know the truth about what Jesus has done for us, and we just forget, and we get living this life trying to do it all on our own. And you've been reminded this morning that no matter how hard you try, your life will be left wanting. And that's not an invitation to try harder. That's an invitation to surrender more. And so if that's you this morning and you know the truth about Jesus, maybe you've been following him for a long time, but you've forgotten it, your memory was short, and you're on that treadmill of religion and you're just trying really hard, and you want to respond and humble yourself again and thank Jesus for the life that he's given you, just want you to raise a hand. The grace that he's given you, yeah. Let me pray for you. Lord, we thank you for those who are making a decision to follow you this morning. Lord, we thank you that you lived the perfect life that we couldn't live, and you gave us the opportunity to live from that place because we couldn't earn it. We can only receive it. So Lord, we receive your forgiveness, your salvation, your grace, and we thank you for that. Lord, for those of us who have forgotten the gospel story, and we end up getting on that religious treadmill, living the life of Belshazzar and trying only to be found out that our life is wanting. Lord, thank you for the reminder this morning through your word that we can't control that first number, second number. We can only decide what to do in the present. And the best decision we can make in the present, Lord, is to humble ourselves and surrender to you. So Jesus, would you fill us with your spirit? Would you give us a sense of eternity in the present? Would we live for your glory, Lord, and our joy? In Jesus' name.